You're asking for how much? Diane from HR laughed, not even trying to hide her condescension. She glanced at my portfolio without really seeing it, then closed it with a dismissive snap. I kept my voice steady despite the heat rising in my cheeks. The market rate for someone with my experience and certifications is $95,000. I'm currently at $72,000 after 4 years with no significant raise. Diane leaned back in her ergonomic chair, the kind denied to junior staff like me, and exchanged a look with my manager, Kevin. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, the glass walls exposing our meeting to curious glances from passing colleagues. Jessica, Kevin sighed, using that patronizing tone reserved for explaining obvious things to children. You're still considered junior staff. We don't negotiate salaries with junior staff, that's company policy. Junior staff. The label they'd kept me under despite managing our entire client database system for the past 2 years, despite training 3 new hires, despite working weekends when the CEO needed urgent reports that nobody else knew how to generate. I've been handling senior responsibilities for over 2 years, I said, sliding forward the documentation I'd prepared. I've implemented system upgrades that saved the company approximately $340,000 annually. I've personally retained the Westfield account when they were considering leaving. Kevin barely glanced at my carefully prepared evidence. The title structure is very clear, Jessica. You need 5 years minimum before consideration for senior status. Unless you have an MBA, I added quietly. Kevin's jaw tightened. We both knew he'd been promoted to senior status after just 2 years, with his fresh MBA and 0 technical experience with our systems. This isn't about education, Diane interjected smoothly. It's about company hierarchy and knowing your place in it. My place. The words hung in the air between us. I understand, I said, gathering my documents. Thank you for your time. As I walked back to my cubicle, I passed the corner office where our CEO was entertaining representatives from Westfield Industries, our biggest client, responsible for 40% of company revenue. Through the glass, I could see them laughing, champagne flutes in hand, celebrating the 3-year contract renewal I'd helped secure by creating custom reporting tools for their unique needs. Tools that only I fully understood how to maintain. Jessica, thank God you answered. The quarterly compliance report is giving us errors again. Can you fix it before the audit next week? You're the only one who ever knows how to solve these things. I glanced at the glass-walled conference room where Kevin and Diane were now chatting and laughing. Kevin caught my eye and pointedly tapped his watch, a reminder that I had a project deadline tomorrow. Of course, Melissa, I said. I'll take care of it right away. That evening, I stayed late as usual, fixing Westfield's reports while simultaneously finishing my assigned project. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband, Mark. Emma's asking when Mommy's coming home for bedtime story. I looked at the photo he'd attached, our 4-year-old daughter clutching her favorite book, eyes already drooping with sleep. Another bedtime I'd miss. As I worked, an email notification popped up on my screen. The subject line made me pause. Westfield Industries, Senior Systems Consultant position. It was from Robert Westfield himself, the CEO of our biggest client. Jessica, I've been impressed with your work on our systems. My team speaks highly of you. We're creating a position to oversee our technical operations and compliance reporting. Would you be interested in discussing? Starting salary $130,000. I stared at the number, then at the family photo on my desk, Mark and Emma at the beach last summer, a rare day I'd managed to take off. Then I looked toward the executive offices, where Kevin was now showing the Westfield representatives our cutting-edge systems that I had built and maintained. My phone buzzed again. Mark. She fell asleep waiting. Will you be home soon? I made my decision in that moment. I replied to Robert's email with 2 words. I'm interested. Then I saved my work, shut down my computer, and walked out at 7:30 p.m. instead of my usual 9 p.m. As I passed Kevin's office, he looked up in surprise. The Westfield report is fixed, and the Johnson project is in your inbox, I said. I'm heading home to see my daughter before she falls asleep. His frown followed me to the elevator, but for once I didn't care. They thought I was replaceable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, Kevin was waiting by my desk when I arrived. "The Johnson project has errors," he said without preamble. "And you left early yesterday without approval." I set down my coffee. "I completed the project before leaving. What errors?" "The formatting is inconsistent with our standards." He dropped a printed copy on my desk, red marks slashed across every page. "And Diane wants to see you about your unauthorized departure." I nodded, keeping my face neutral despite the knot forming in my stomach. This was retaliation, plain and simple. The meeting with Diane was brief and humiliating. She slid a formal warning across her desk while reciting company policy about core hours and proper channels for leaving early. I signed it without argument, which seemed to disappoint her. "Jessica, your attitude lately concerns me," she said, leaning forward. "Perhaps you've forgotten how fortunate you are to work here. We have a stack of resumes from people who would be grateful for your position." I thought of Emma asking Mark again this morning, "Why does Mommy always work late?" I thought of the Westfield email sitting in my personal inbox. I smiled. "Thank you for the reminder, Diane. Is there anything else?" My calm response clearly unsettled her. She dismissed me with a wave. The next 2 weeks were excruciating. Kevin scrutinized my every deliverable, finding fault with work that had previously earned praise. Assignments that should have gone to me were redistributed. Colleagues who'd once sought my help now avoided eye contact in the break room. Meanwhile, I'd had 2 interviews with Westfield, both conducted during my lunch breaks at a cafe 3 blocks away. Robert had been impressed by my knowledge of their systems and my ideas for improvements. The offer was real and getting better. $135,000, flexible hours, partial remote work, and a clear path to advancement. Then came the final blow. "We're restructuring the database team," Kevin announced during our department meeting. "Jessica, you'll be transitioning your client accounts to Greg. He'll be taking over as database lead." Greg, the new hire I'd spent the last 6 months training. Greg, who still emailed me questions about basic system functions. "When does this transition begin?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Immediately. I need comprehensive documentation of all your processes by Friday." 3 days to document 4 years of specialized knowledge. It was impossible, and Kevin knew it. That night, I worked until midnight at home, after putting Emma to bed. Not on Kevin's documentation request, but on my resignation letter and a detailed proposal for Westfield. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Kevin and Diane. Their smug expressions as I entered the conference room told me everything. They thought they'd broken me. "I wanted to discuss the transition plan," I began. Kevin nodded. "I'm glad you're being reasonable. We need that documentation by—" "I won't be providing documentation," I interrupted. "I'm resigning effective 2 weeks from today." The shock on their faces was almost worth the past 4 years of underappreciation. "You can't just leave," Kevin sputtered. "The Westfield audit is in 3 weeks. Their compliance reports are no longer my concern," I finished for him. "As you've made clear, I'm just junior staff, easily replaceable." Diane recovered first. "Where are you going?" Her tone suggested I'd be blacklisted wherever it was. I smiled. "I've accepted a senior position elsewhere." "You'll regret this," Kevin said, his face reddening. "No one leaves this company without proper knowledge transfer. We'll withhold your final paycheck until—" "That would be illegal," I said calmly, sliding my resignation letter across the table. "And I've documented all our conversations about my compensation and treatment, just in case." As I walked back to my desk, my phone buzzed with a text from Robert Westfield. "Offer letter sent to your personal email. Can't wait to have you on board. P.S. Looking forward to your insights during our audit of your current employer." I smiled. They had no idea what was coming. My last 2 weeks at Meridian Systems were a masterclass in malicious compliance. I arrived exactly at 9 a.m. and left precisely at 5 p.m. I documented everything, but only exactly what was in my job description, nothing about the custom solutions I'd built or the workarounds I'd created to make our outdated systems function. Kevin grew increasingly desperate as the Westfield audit approached. "These notes are useless," he hissed, dropping my documentation on my desk. "Where are the procedures for the compliance reporting module?" I blinked innocently. "That's a proprietary solution I developed outside my job requirements. Since Meridian never formally recognized or compensated me for that work, I assumed it wasn't part of the knowledge transfer." His face turned an alarming shade of red. "You know damn well we need those procedures for the Westfield audit." "Then perhaps we should discuss appropriate compensation for that intellectual property," I suggested calmly. "After all, Meridian does negotiate with senior staff, correct? We're prepared to offer you a consultant fee to properly document the Westfield systems," Diane said stiffly. $2,000 for comprehensive documentation." I pretended to consider it. "The market rate for this specialized knowledge is closer to $15,000, given the urgent timeline and critical nature of the client relationship." Kevin slammed his hand on the table. "This is extortion." "This is negotiation," I corrected, "something Meridian doesn't do with junior staff, as I recall." They eventually agreed to $10,000, with payment upon delivery of complete documentation. I signed their contract, knowing exactly what I was doing. On my final day, I submitted a 200-page manual that was technically complete, but practically useless, filled with jargon, circular references, and procedures so complex that following them would be impossible without my specific knowledge. It would pass legal scrutiny but fail in practical application. I turned in my badge to a sullen Diane, who handed me a check without meeting my eyes. "I hope you realize burning bridges like this will follow you in your career," she warned. I smiled. "Some bridges aren't worth maintaining. Goodbye, Diane." The following Monday, I started at Westfield Industries. Robert gave me a private office with a window, introduced me as their new senior systems architect, and immediately put me in charge of preparing for the upcoming compliance audit of Meridian Systems. For 2 weeks, I built a new, streamlined reporting system for Westfield while watching Meridian's increasingly panicked emails to their client. Greg couldn't get the compliance reports to work. Kevin was making excuses. The CEO was now personally involved. Then came the day of the audit. I walked into Meridian's lobby at precisely 9 a.m., wearing a tailored suit instead of my usual business casual attire. The receptionist's jaw dropped when I gave my name. "Jessica Chen, Westfield Industries. I'm here for the compliance audit." "You," he managed. "Good morning, Kevin," I said pleasantly. "I'm representing Westfield as their systems architect today. Shall we begin?" The meeting room was packed. Meridian's CEO, their legal counsel, Diane looking like she'd swallowed something sour, and Greg sweating profusely beside a laptop displaying error messages. "Ms. Chen will be leading the technical portion of today's audit," Robert Westfield announced, enjoying the stunned silence. I opened my laptop. "Let's start with the compliance reporting module. I understand there have been some difficulties." Greg looked ready to faint. "The system keeps rejecting the data formats. I've followed the documentation, but perhaps I can help," I offered, my voice dripping with professional courtesy. After all, I designed the original system. "Perhaps I can help," I offered, my voice dripping with professional courtesy. After all, I designed the original system. For the next hour, I methodically exposed every flaw in their implementation, every shortcut they'd taken, every compliance risk they'd created. I wasn't vindictive, just thoroughly, devastatingly professional. When I finally closed my laptop, Robert spoke. "Based on these findings, Westfield cannot continue with Meridian under the current arrangement. We'll need significant changes before we can move forward." Meridian's CEO looked shell-shocked. "What changes?" Robert smiled. "Jessica has prepared recommendations." "Jessica?" I slid a proposal across the table. "Westfield requires a complete system overhaul, implemented by an approved vendor, which I'd be happy to recommend. Estimated cost? $1.2 million. The cost of undervaluing an employee? Priceless. The aftermath of the Westfield audit was swift and merciless. Within a week, Meridian's stock dropped 18% as news spread that they'd lost their biggest client. The CEO called an emergency board meeting where, according to my former colleague Wei, who still worked there, Kevin and Diane were thrown spectacularly under the bus. The CEO went ballistic, Wei told me over coffee. He kept asking how they let someone with your knowledge walk out the door right before a major audit. Kevin tried blaming you for not documenting properly, but then the CEO asked why they hadn't addressed your compensation requests months ago. I sipped my latte, enjoying the sunshine streaming through the cafe window, a luxury I could now appreciate during my flexible work hours. And what happened to them? Wei grinned. Kevin was demoted. He's now reporting to Greg, who's completely overwhelmed, and Diane was reassigned to the satellite office in Buffalo. Justice had its own elegant symmetry sometimes. My new role at Westfield was everything Meridian had never offered. My ideas were valued, my expertise acknowledged, and most importantly, I was home for dinner with Mark and Emma every night. The extra $63,000 in salary meant we could finally afford to move out of our cramped apartment into a house with a yard where Emma could play. 3 months after the audit, I received a LinkedIn request from Meridian's CEO himself, followed by a message asking if I'd consider consulting for them on their system rebuild. I quoted him my consulting rate, $300 per hour, with a 100-hour minimum commitment. He didn't even attempt to negotiate. The real victory, though, came 6 months later. Westfield hosted an industry conference on compliance technology, and Robert asked me to be the keynote speaker. As I took the stage, I spotted familiar faces in the audience, including Meridian's entire executive team, now clients of the consulting firm I advised on the side. Effective systems aren't just about technology, I told the packed room. They're about valuing the people who build and maintain them. The most expensive mistake a company can make is treating specialized talent as replaceable junior staff. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I continued, "At Westfield, we've implemented a knowledge equity program that ensures technical contributors are recognized and compensated for their intellectual capital, regardless of title or tenure." After my speech, Diane approached me at the reception, her expression carefully neutral. "Impressive presentation, Jessica. You've certainly landed on your feet." "Thank you, Diane. How's Buffalo?" She winced slightly. "I'm actually transitioning to a new role. The company is restructuring again." "I heard," I said, taking a sip of champagne. "I recommended the firm handling the reorganization." Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. I excused myself to join Robert and some potential clients, leaving her standing alone by the hors d'oeuvres. That evening, as I drove home, I called Mark to let him know I was on my way. "Emma's got her dance recital costume all laid out for you to see," he said, the smile evident in his voice. "And I've got dinner ready." "I'll be home in 20 minutes, I promised, something I could never have said at Meridian. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, I promised, something I could never have said at Meridian. As I pulled into our driveway, I saw Emma's face pressed against the window, waiting for me. Inside, Mark had prepared my favorite pasta, and Emma twirled in her sparkly recital costume, chattering about how her teacher said she was the best hopper in the class. Later, after Emma was asleep, Mark and I sat on our new patio, enjoying the evening breeze. "I got another offer today," I told him. "Westfield's competitor. They're offering a director position and a 30% raise." "Are you considering it?" he asked. I shook my head. Robert already matched it when I mentioned it to him. Plus, he's adding a development team that will report to me. Mark squeezed my hand. "A far cry from junior staff who shouldn't negotiate, huh?" I laughed. The funny thing is, I'm actually grateful to Diane and Kevin now. If they hadn't been so dismissive, I might still be there, missing Emma's bedtime stories and accepting less than I'm worth. "To underestimating you," Mark said, raising his glass. "The most expensive mistake they ever made." I clinked my glass against his. And to knowing your value, even when others don't see it yet. As we sat there, I thought about the email I'd received that morning from a junior developer at Meridian, asking for mentoring. I'd already replied with an invitation to coffee next week. Some cycles needed to be broken, and I was in a position to break them. They had thought I was replaceable. Their mistake had become my greatest opportunity.